you probably can't tell me, but I think there probably is like a robe that you all get, right? There's like a trustee
We
robe
might.
that you have to.
Like, I'll tell you one thing: they're not black; they're pink now. So I'm so happy that we have so many women. I'm just like, yes.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, a show that explores the journeys of some of the most interesting members of the Hamilton College community. This week's guest is Manal Ataya, class of 2001. All right, big one this week, our first trustee. You know, when I used to co-host a sports talk radio show on WHCL as a student, before every show, we'd have to play a disclaimer that said the opinions and ideas expressed in the show do not represent those of Hamilton College or the trustees of Hamilton College. And I remember thinking every time that played, do these trustees really want to distance themselves that much from my opinion of Mark Messier and the New York Rangers? And that was generally my understanding and perception of the trustees. That and any check that was written to the school was written to the Board of Trustees. So they were the ones getting all my money. So it all fed into this image of this secret organization, this mythic entity, the trustees. It conjured an image of a secret society with hooded robes making all these decisions. These rich old guys, you know, ruling the world, or at least the world that I inhabited in Clinton, New York. And for some reason, I continue to carry some of that image in my head to this day when I hear about the trustees. So along comes Manal Ataya this week to dispel me of many of those perceptions of the trustees. I talked to Manal this week as I was drinking my morning coffee. I was watching the sun set behind her on Zoom as we were talking to each other on opposite ends of the world. Me, the east coast of the U.S., she in the UAE. So she wins the award for furthest guest I've had distance-wise so far in this show. In the UAE, Manal is the Director General of the Sharjah Museum Authority and is a leading figure in the UAE cultural sector, where she dedicates her time to advocacy initiatives for accessible arts education, programs that promote cross-cultural dialogue and social inclusion, as well as mentoring young women in leadership. We covered quite a bit of ground in this conversation, and I really enjoyed it. Manal talks about her experience coming from Dubai over to the U.S. to go to school at Hamilton, and all that she had to learn and ultimately did learn to be able to thrive at a school here in the U.S. What it's like living as an Arab and a Muslim here in the U.S., particularly after 9/11. And then ultimately she shares her thoughts on how finding common ground can help bridge the divide between cultures and countries. And it's an interesting perspective she shares throughout, and it becomes clear why she's a trustee. I personally got a lot out of this conversation, including a new friend, one that's 6,500 miles away. So enjoy it. Enjoy this conversation with Manal Ataya, class of 2001. So I'm going to apologize right off the bat for what will likely be a number of dumb American questions. I am very much a dumb American, so I apologize ahead of time. And start with, just so I approach this appropriately, Your Excellency, is that right?
I prefer not to use that.
Okay.
That given title, yeah, there's no need for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I didn't want to offend.
No, it's in Arab, I guess, media in particular, they have to use official titles, so I can't kind of get around it, unfortunately, for Arabic media. But generally, English media, I can kind of request it to be removed. So they do that for me.
Got it. So how are things going over there?
It's funny. Things are going well, but funny in that it's almost like we're kind of not going through a pandemic. So
Hmm.
um, for the first time, I went to a dinner a few days ago, which was, regulated in terms of social distancing, et cetera. But people were still, having dinner on tables without masks on and, chatting and everything. And it almost felt a bit surreal because most
Hmm.
people I know are, in lockdown and unable to even leave their homes. But I mean, we were able to do this, of course, because the UAE responded very quickly. We have a much smaller population. And they just went ahead and worked really hard to get people tested and vaccinated. So out of the 10 million people in the population, 7 million are already vaccinated. So that's amazing.
It sure
So,
is.
we feel a lot more safe. And in general, they did everything kind of like stage by stage. So instead of, initially there was a like 3-month lockdown, but after that, it was sort of like, let's open up a couple of things and see how it goes and just regulate things really well. And they did that. And I think people responded really well. Like, I think it's different in some societies. People feel, as I've seen in the media, it's against their freedom,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever it is, to not do what they want to do. But here, people don't look at it like that. It's almost like it's your sort of, they refer to it as a national duty, but in a way, it's almost like it's a social good you do for society. It's sort of, you can't just do what you want if it affects other people. So it kind of has to be a collective effort from everyone to do the right thing so that we all, get through this together. And I think that's a really nice feeling I felt. I didn't feel like the government had to pressure us or anything. I think people were like, yes, the sooner we can, get to some form of normalcy, the better. So we'll do whatever we have to do, and we've done that. So I think that's why we're doing pretty well at this point. So,
Boy, that must be nice. That must be nice to have a sense of community and
yeah.
the sense to do the right thing. I mean, that's the frustrating thing here is the feeling that the government has to force these things, because if they didn't, we'd be even worse off because people just can't, just the selfishness.
I definitely think that's part of it. But I also understand the complexities of much larger countries with different states and different, everyone has different, I guess, legislation, and it can be harder to do
Of
that.
course.
But I know some really great, some of the other really great countries in the EU or whatever who are doing much better because they've seen the devastation it's caused. Unfortunately, it had to get really bad for them to realize,
Yeah.
they have to do something. We already were like, this could get really bad. Of course, you can imagine, because Dubai is such a hub for the region. So, if we took it very, like, let's say took a relaxed attitude to this, it would have had, a really tremendous effect on the economy and tourism and everything that the country runs on. So it was just sort of a no-brainer that we were not going to wait till it gets worse. We were going to try to figure out how to fix things right away. So, we're really blessed, I think, for that. And I really feel for people who are in much more worse situations.
Yeah. It's been a terrible thing, and interesting to see how various communities, various countries have dealt with it, and the fact that it can be so different.
Yeah, that's always the kind of conundrum of, I guess, let's say issues in the world that people view as sort of country specific, but they're
Right.
not.
Right.
Like the environment, like the climate crisis. These are global issues that require global responses and global accountability. And I find it so puzzling that a country will say, well, it's kind of not our problem,
Right.
and let other people deal with it because they're worse off. But whether, we're creating a lot of, let's say, pollution, if our neighbor's creating pollution, it's going to affect us. So
Right.
It's not something you can kind of compartmentalize, I guess is the word. All these things affect us because the ecosystem and the environment and everything affects all of us, what we breathe, what we consume from our resources, et cetera. So I think in a way, the pandemic is the same thing. It's a global thing. It's not who has it worse than the other and who should do more than the other. We should all be helping each other because we all move. We're all migrating, and traveling and, to function, we're going to have to be able to do that eventually again. So
That's right. And you work in a world that relies somewhat on travel and tourism and visitors. So how has the pandemic impact your world?
Well, for one, as I mentioned earlier, there was an effect, but because we were able to reopen, obviously much earlier, as I mentioned, in other countries. So other countries have suffered because they haven't been able to reopen.
Yeah.
Until either the end of last year or even up until this year, they're still closed.
Yep.
A lot of other institutions, and of course in the U.S., as you would know, they are run primarily on the money they get through revenue generation or through, of course, endowments and things like that. And we're government funded, so to have a government that could support us through that time is obviously a different situation and extremely helpful to allow us to continue to do the things we needed to do. But still, having said that, we knew that even if we reopened after a few months, which we did, we were still going to have such a low visitation, just because everyone's still worried, and also because we had to still limit, the amount of people who could come into a museum anyway,
right,
as part of the regulations. So we knew that we had no option but to kind of go along with what was happening everywhere else, which was sort of to pivot a bit more to the digital realm and platforms and try to do a lot where we could, provide things online for people to do and to see. So, putting exhibitions virtually online, really increasing our social media sort of, engagement. We also worked a lot on producing sort of home arts and crafts kinds of workshops for kids and families to do at home with things they can find at home. We started a lecture series in Arabic and English on a variety of topics, so people could, tune in and watch things and learn things. So that was really very, very helpful. And we're one of the few people, in the UAE that were able to, do that so quickly and do it effectively, which is excellent, and just produce a lot of content, including a conference towards the end of the year. So we did a lot that year. We learned a lot.
I imagine that opened things up to far more visitors and a larger audience than you normally would have, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what we learned, I think, was that we also were quite, as much as we thought we had a very diverse audience, to have people from around the globe, tuning in to a lecture, for example, was eye-opening. I thought, I can't believe we never did this before. I mean, we should have always had things like this available online, so that, for example, a regular lecture that we would have, which normally might have physically 20 to 30 attendees, all from the UAE generally, as in residents. Now we had 200 attendees with, a good 50% of them being from countries from Sweden and, Germany and Israel and Egypt. And it was amazing, to see all different people tune in. So it just made us realize that we need to continue to do that as well.
That was going to be my next question, is that there's some of these changes lead to longer, more permanent changes in terms of digital engagement with people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think, I'm still a firm believer in the power of experience, that sort of visceral, real experience of first of all, being around people, socializing, communicating, discussing things, seeing that reaction to something, and then also, actually doing things hands-on. Activities are very important, especially for families and younger people to learn. So it still has to be a fundamental part of our sort of learning and educational mission, but definitely 100%. I think the part of the digital for me is more of an extension of my belief in access and accessibility, and that, where we can, we should make more information, more, programs and things available for people who either are unable to be there or to attend physically, for people who want to research and, gain further knowledge about particular, collections, et cetera. So there's definitely a bigger part of it, which is about reaching a much wider audience, and being, a proper resource and for others. We have always done that, but never at such a large scale. So it's been easier to do that now. And I think shows great benefits. So yeah, we will continue to keep doing that as much as possible.
Do you think that that will lead to more visitors in person?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. What I was going to end on saying was that, it's still a very kind of, it's such a new area in many ways, because, even the concept of engagement is, well, how do you engage necessarily if it's one way, if you're just sending out things or putting things online, but you don't really know the response. Was something I talked about actually at that same dinner I mentioned with a faculty professor who was saying to me, it's been really tough trying to teach, students virtually. There's so much learning that, doesn't happen in the lecture. And I said, yeah, it's, to me, it's exactly like, and it reminds me of my Hamilton experience, but also in life, that I said, every time I've gone to a work-related conference, it's never necessarily been the lecture, or the presentation that's been of interest. It's been the coffee session and the breakout session after, where you chat with people and they might make a remark about something being said, but then you have this completely different, exchange. And that's really where kind of the gold nuggets are. And I thought, that must be hard with students who are just tuning into a lecture and then you're in isolation after. They don't really have that chance. And also the kind of discussions that are not kind of, they're not, what's the word? They're not kind of forced, these are discussions like I remember in college, you wouldn't, it's not like saying, oh, now is a session and now you have to discuss this with other people. It's more like you happen to be wandering around or having a coffee or sitting somewhere in the library, and someone would come up to you and say, oh, I took this class, or someone's taught, or have this book, and then you just start a conversation. It's very sort of, you know what I mean? Kind of off the cuff, informal. And that's, I think, where some of the greatest learning happens. It's where there isn't that pressure of, oh, I have 30 minutes or 40 minutes to discuss this, issue or topic with my fellow classmates. It's rather, that much more fluid type of, longer term and random kind of learning that happens when you're just sharing spaces with people and you're interacting with people,
It comes up a lot, and it's something we deal with, in my day job, where the hallway conversation, just you lose a lot by not having that. You lose, just on the human level, you lose those connections, because then the relationships you have with your coworkers, or in the Hamilton students example with your fellow classmates, is it just becomes very much a transactional, business focused sort of relationship, and you don't have, you don't learn much about people in the hallway of, and that's how you make those connections. And ultimately in business, that's how you get people to do what you need them to do, is you can appeal to their personal side when you know more about them, and we don't have that happen.
And it's funny you say this, because I just had an image of one of the things that one of the first sort of let's say odd reactions I had to being at Hamilton, that later of course became a normal habit, which was how much people hugged one another. Just getting from one class to another, there must have been like 50 hugs between. And I remember when I first got there, obviously I was sort of like taken aback, because people don't hug here like that, and definitely not male to female. So I was sort of like, oh, hello. And people would just kind of hug me just to say hi, literally like hi, and then hug and then walk off. And it would just happen so often. I just thought, what is going on? Why is everybody so, so like emotional, or so kind of, I guess, physically tactile in their way that they have to express themselves. And then later I realized it's a form of closeness. It's a form of human connection. And I really felt that later on, I really enjoyed getting hugs, and actually to have less hugs, I'd feel worse. And I know later, of course, there've been many studies about how hugging is very important, and physiologically it has a good effect on the body. It gives you some dopamine. It makes you feel happier. It's good for children to hug them and to hold a hug for 20 seconds, apparently. So there are certain things that, I can see were benefits of just being around people and sharing a space with them. And of course, like I said, sharing, hugs, for example, is a very simple one, but that's so critical, I think, to making real connections with people, and to just be seeing them on a screen or meet them once or twice in person is just, I find that really scary. And I don't know what else to say, but I feel very, I think, I feel a lot of pain, I guess, for people have to go through that now. I
Yeah.
can't imagine they're living already in a social media world, which is so fake and curated and, and critical of everything and only showing the best. And then they're also going to have to deal with not even really interacting with real people. It's almost
Right.
like it's hitting them double, this sort of living literally in a very virtual kind of world that it just can't be healthy. It just can't be.
I completely agree. And I wonder when we all finally get back to normal, how long it's going to take for that to return. Because I sense it already of, just this apprehension of, wait, should we be this close? Or I think I need to keep my distance. And, it's all elbow shake, no handshakes or hugs. Right? And are we ever going to go back to that? I don't know.
Exactly. And, that same dinner, I felt that, it's been obviously like a year since that kind of socializing. And I felt awkward. I felt like, have I forgotten how to make small talk? Have I forgotten how to actually read social cues, in
right.
people? I felt so anxious after that, not about feeling that I'd get sick, but rather like, did I come off okay? Did I articulate well? Were people interested in what I was saying? It's almost like you forget how to converse. It's a very strange thing. And imagine that was just for a year. And I'm thinking about people who already have that because they live in this sort of, messaging and WhatsApp and TikTok, Snap world where they don't talk or have conversations. They literally just message one another. And then this is now compounded with this. So if anything, it's worse. I think it's almost going to be a type of, what's it called? Post-traumatic type of a disorder, a different kind of how you deal with this sort of, it's traumatic. I think it is traumatic, really.
Yeah.
And we'll see effects of it on mental health.
No question.
Quite a few years. Yeah.
No question. And then, you brought up Hamilton, you're talking about essentially 50% of some students' college experience completely disrupted. And that living on that small campus, and I talked to President Whitman the other day, and he talked about the residential college, and that's what you come there for. And students are either at home doing this Zoom thing, or, can you imagine in one of those tiny little dorm rooms just sitting on Zoom all day? I mean, my God.
Well, you know what else I was thinking now that you just said it is I would have never gone to Hamilton if this was my option. If my option was that I'm going to stay here in my hometown in Dubai and that I was going to just take online classes, I would have been like, well, that's pretty much 80% of my education gone, because we all know that the chunk of your education is the learning that you do of experience of the ups and downs of meeting people, of situations, of crisis, of friendships, of breakups, of, you know what I mean? All kinds of things that college experience is about. I mean, I remember, all these experiences because they were so new to me, and they taught me things like, Manal, you have to be patient. Manal, this is okay. Manal, people think differently. And it's not something I would have learned in a lecture. It was about living with people who have, different things that they do, people who listen to different music, sharing a bathroom with males. These are all things you have to kind of start to get your head around and adapt to. And if I was doing this online, I wouldn't have to do any of that. I could be I could stay in this comfort zone. And I think the comfort zone is basically your demise. The whole idea of education is, to continue to be pushed into realms that are, unknown and are unfamiliar. And that's how you learn the best lessons in life. And so, for me, if I was in that situation, it would seem literally useless to continue my education as an international student. I say in particular, to be doing this online when I'm not physically there with all the different people I would have met.
And then I wonder, what does this experience do to the long-term connection these current students will have with the school, right? Yeah. If you're deprived of so many of those things that ultimately make you enjoy your experience there and have a deeper connection with it, if it was a Zoom, I wonder what alumni engagement of that sort of era of student will look like long-term. I think something the school's got to worry about.
Exactly. Whenever I think about Hamilton, I'm not thinking about oh my God, that class I took, that particular book I read or that particular class was, was so sort of life changing. It really was more of the relationships, like I mentioned earlier, the relationship I had with a professor, for example, or advisor who, continued to support me and help me and, encourage me. It's the relationships with students who, loved loved me, who cared for me, but also those who challenged me and weren't so nice to me. These are all ways you learn, and you create the memories they're meaningful because you see yourself either having these great special connections with people, but then also you realize that from not very good situations, it makes you tougher and you learn.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had those, let's say, situations if I was sitting right here like this through Zoom. They all had to happen in person for them to really be something, that would affect me, and that I could learn from and be a better person, hopefully, because of it. So yeah, it's a tricky one, this whole situation.
It really is. How did you end up at Hamilton?
Oh gosh, that's kind of a funny story, I think, in that. So I need people to understand one thing. When I was class of 2001. So that meant I was in high school, in the 90s. And yeah, it is literally a lifetime. So in those years, in the 90s, my only concept of America was through like those teen films, like, what was that film? Was it Clueless or these kinds of movies, or were those later? But yeah, these kinds of teen movies that were usually about high school, right? So the concept of high school and this concept of popularity and jocks and like prom, those were like the key things.
And you grew up in Dubai?
Yeah, so I grew up here, and American culture only permeated through these types of things, basically Hollywood films. I would say nothing else, and of course some music, on the radio and stuff like that. But generally, my education was bilingual. It was in Arabic and English, but the English was more British English and British curriculum, so to speak. So, we didn't really have a lot of programs, let's say, on TV here were from Australia and from England. And then you'd have a few that were from the US, like those famous ones. I can't remember one of them, but I think it was Dynasty or something. But I was too young to watch that apparently. But, things like that. So, I had a very, very limited, I'd say, understanding of what the US could be. I had been there once or twice as a very young child, maybe 10 or something. So of course I have no memory otherwise, and no real experience. And then, I also didn't have any American friends here. I didn't know anyone who was American. All my friends were Arab, mostly UAE nationals as well. So, going to America was, I have to say, I wasn't prepared. And how it all happened, to go back to your question, was, so my father basically, was very worried about us going away for an education. He wanted us to have an education in the US because he had an education in the US. And, he knew that the US education system was, in his mind, really one of the best in the world. It was excellent. And he wanted to give us that opportunity. His only concern, of course, was, living there alone and, the worry about big cities and crime and everything else. Because, we live in a very, very safe country. And he said, the only thing I'll kind of allow to happen is to go to either an all-female school or a very, very small, kind of school of small in terms of number of students, and ideally, of course, in a very rural area where you're not in the middle of a city where there's a lot of kind of the dangers of crime and etc. So, that gave us kind of limited options, if you know what I mean. It kind of down. So yes, obviously Miami State was out of the picture, or any of those really.
No, NYU, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can't even think of something, but yeah, exactly. So, my sister ended up going to Smith. Eldest sister went to Smith, and then my second sister went to Hamilton, but she was a senior when I got there, and she was doing she did her semester abroad in France. So I really only saw her for like a semester. And she was pre-med. So even when I saw her, if you can imagine, I barely saw her as a pre-med student. So, and then after that, my sister went to Randolph-Macon, and then, there was me. And so, it's kind of, you can see the picture here, but Hamilton was just one of those, because as I said, it was kind of narrowed down. And then actually, for some reason, I think in the 90s, Hamilton put their name as a college on kind of a list of sort of small colleges, that was presented to people who had gave an option in their SAT testing to, would you like to get more information from these colleges? And I just ticked it, and then that's why I got the brochure and a couple of other smaller schools in the US. And, I went ahead and applied to them. But I honestly had no concept of what people now I see go through, the process of applications and what they to get into college. I mean, I barely, the way schooling worked here was just not like that. It wasn't constructed in a way to prepare you for all of that. So I just went for it. And, I got a couple of acceptances, and Hamilton was one. And of course, because my sister was there, my dad was like, well, that's the one you're going to. You're going to be safe and have a bit of a chaperone for the first year. So I think that's what made me say, okay, of course I'll go. And I did. And honestly, it is the best decision that ever was made. I would never have wanted to go anywhere else. I don't regret any moment of being at Hamilton. So, but it's just funny that I ended up, kind of in the middle of nowhere, and coming from Dubai, where nobody knew where I was from. It was really kind of odd. I think later on, I remember meeting my friends, and they said, I don't know how you came to Hamilton. Now that we know what Dubai is, I don't know how you came here. It must have been really tough. And I was like, yeah, it was tough in some ways, but it was also exhilarating in many, many other ways.
When you got there, were you looking around for the Valley girls and the jocks and wondering, where?
I kind of was, I was thinking, there must, where's that system, kind of trying to figure out how it works. And of course there was, in a way, there was that system.
Sure.
There was sort of the football players and the this players and kind of the table with the eccentric types, I'd call them, other things. But I think the good thing that I always think about is that because I didn't go through that typical American high school system, I think I was very sort of, in a way, unbiased to people. I was very tolerant of, if that's the word, but it's not the right word, but you know what I mean? I didn't see people differently, if that makes sense. I saw everyone for who they were. I didn't think that there was a hierarchy, let's put it that way. I saw the movies that talk about the hierarchy of all these different groups, but for me, that didn't exist. And I just wanted to know people. I wanted to meet every kind of person I could. I've always had this sort of, kind of mental acquisitiveness, I just was always thirsting to learn and meet people and find out, so where are you from and what do you do? And where's that? And trying to understand, because it was just so different from where I had been. Of course, Dubai was very international and I did know people from all kinds of places, but never at that kind of a depth, that you can when you live with people for 4 years and you interact with them on such a constant basis. So it was so exciting for me. It was so freeing for me. And somehow I maneuvered all these kind of hierarchies, invisible ones. I managed to kind of move into them and befriend almost everyone from all types. And I never felt like I had issues, if that makes sense, where some people I think felt isolated.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that because I'm class of 99, so we overlapped there for a few years. And my recollection is that it wasn't the most diverse campus in the world during that time. Yeah. So I'm happy to hear that you felt welcomed and were able to integrate in a number of different groups as, someone coming from where you came from.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, though, I'm saying this before 9/11, right? So
yeah,
9/11 was definitely a point where things changed. And my brother was in school when 9/11 happened, and his reality was completely different from mine. He saw the change in how he was treated and his safety there also. And I think I also remember that after coming to the States after 9/11, I had to lie to people if they asked me where I was from, or I not as in people that were my friends, I'm saying, but people if I've met someone at some kind of social thing, or if I was in a cab and the cab driver said, "So where are you coming from?" I wouldn't dare say I was coming from the Middle East or from Dubai. I was so frightened about what the possible reaction could be. Yeah. And so I kind of where that was so different from when I went to Hamilton. When I was at Hamilton, it's like I wore a sign that said, "I'm from Dubai and I'm Muslim, and I'm very proud of being Arab, and all my different multiple identities." I felt very comfortable with that, and because of the way people reacted, which was always either a bit curious or very positive, or indifferent, but in a way that wasn't like negative indifference. It was rather like, "Oh, okay, well that's great," and nothing else came out of it. Some people were very, very respectful, I would say. If anything, some of my close friends who I got to know became then very respectful of my culture, my background. And I always loved that they really cared about, making sure that I was comfortable about certain things. And so I feel like that wouldn't have been the case had it been after, unfortunately, that really, really unfortunate and devastating incident that happened. So
yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that you wore it as a badge of honor and would shout it, because it triggers a memory for me, and it may have been someone from your class if I think of the timing right. I remember there was I was an RA my junior year, and there was a gathering of first year students, and there was someone from Pakistan, and they were going, "Where's everybody from?" And he stood up and yelled, "Pakistan!" like with the biggest, most prideful shout ever. And everyone laughed and loved it. And, and everyone sort of fell in love with him from that moment forward. And, that was, probably, 97, 98, sometime around then. And fast forward just a few years, and I can't imagine he was shouting that.
Oh, no, I doubt very much he would. I mean, that used to be that became kind of almost like a little terror in me, that if I went to, because one of my friends, which I think, you interviewed Selena Kopic.
Yep.
I remember going to one of her shows, one of her gigs, and different comedians were out earlier, and they asked those questions, right? Like, "Oh, who are you?" And I thought, please do not ask me, because I don't want to say where I'm from, because I know I'm going to get attacked. Like, and that's a very scary feeling to carry with you, because you just don't know. And you don't know what people are going to say, but I know that based on bad experiences, right? Sure. I know that based on having had said that to people, and they start going off on, "Well, your country's this and you people are this." And I'm thinking, well, no, actually we're not even involved in that issue.
Right.
And it's hard to explain that to people who are just obviously very emotional, or very, just get very riled up about things, and are not willing to listen. And I know that people like that are not the kinds of people who you can reason with, so to speak. So you just have to sort of, take a few steps back. But it's been tough. I mean, there were times in Hamilton I did feel that certain things were said that were definitely not okay, and put me in sort of weird situations by some students. And I remember one who did say some pretty terrible things. But I approached him, and I said, "Listen, what you said was not okay. It's not true. You shouldn't say things like that." Actually, what he said would have been considered hate speech today, but then it wasn't. And I just said, "That's not okay." And he was actually good about it. He said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend, and it's, we're all good." And I said, "Yeah, we're all good. I mean, I just wanted you to know that that was not okay to hear." And the problem was, as you said, I was one out of the only two Arabs in the school at the time. The other person was also a very close friend of mine, still is. She came from Cairo. And, when you're only two people, so much stuff can be said, and you're never going to always be there to hear it. So
sure.
A lot of it people get away with it, and it becomes a normal thing to say or do. And that's why it's so important to be aware of, all of us, about all these sort of, implicit and explicit, influences and stereotypes we have about people, and the biases that we carry, and just to be aware of what we're saying and what we're doing, and learning from how to hurt people less and how to be more understanding of situations, and to look at things from a perspective of, I want to learn more about you, rather than I already have a, a feeling or an opinion about you, and I'm going to stick to it no matter what. I mean, that's a tough thing, is trying to crack people like that, I think.
Okay. Well, that experience that you talk about, that's the way it's supposed to work, right? That's the way it should always work, especially on a college campus where everyone's trying to find themselves and learn about the world. It's just a shame that there's just such a lack of understanding in this country about the Middle East in general, right? I mean, even after all this time and all of our history with the Middle East, relatively intelligent people just have such a lack of awareness that leads to a lot of what you're talking about.
Yes, of course. I actually don't think even education plays so much of a part in it, because I've met many people who are highly educated that have quite narrow views about things. I think, I'm also I'm not immune to this. When I went to school, obviously the history we studied was Arab history. So we studied the history of Arab countries, etc. We really rarely, and let's say in very few major historic moments, let's say like Napoleon, because of course he came and colonized North Africa, and that's certain parts of the Arab world, North African countries, Arab countries. So certain things where there was some kind of a connection, we studied that. But I mean, we did not study American history or anything like that. And I would imagine people in America would not study European history or Arab history either. So there's already that coming. People are coming to you from almost like a zero understanding. Yeah. And I think the difference only is are you aware of that sort of ignorance? And then what do you do to kind of fill it in? And in my case, I did as much as I could to just soak up everything from the Americans around me. I just listened, I heard, I asked questions, I read prolifically, and I just tried to understand things that were actually quite complicated for me. I took a class, which is one of the ones I was graded the worst in I think my history of Hamilton, which happened to be the course called American Society. No surprise. But I put that challenge across, to myself. I said, this is going to be very hard, because this is the one thing I don't know anything about, but I want to learn. But it was tough for me, because they were talking about all these things that, you take for granted, but I don't know what an election process is. I don't know what a Democrat is. I don't know what a Republican is. I don't know what a welfare system is. These are all completely new concepts, all these different subcultures in America. And, these are, and moments when, suffrage, and then, feminism. And this was like, blew my mind. I was like, what is all of this? But people in the class pretty much knew what was happening. So it was tough. I struggled with things like that. And, but I tried my best to not show it. I think I was good at, just mimicking others so that I didn't stand out too much. I think I was very conscious not to stick out in that way. I wanted to always feel like I assimilated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard you talk about, in doing some research on your work, the idea of cultural diplomacy. And I feel like a lot of the work what you talk about in your work feeds into sort of addressing sort of this topic we're talking about. Yeah,
it does. I mean, cultural diplomacy, or the term soft power, was only, coined a couple of years ago by Joseph Nye. And he, this idea of soft doesn't mean that it's any less important than hard diplomacy, but it does mean that it's a different form, and it can be an extremely useful and I would say successful tool to help countries bridge a lot of differences, and people mainly, to bridge these kind of gaps of, we talked about just now, ignorance and misunderstanding, and taking sort of very strong opinions or standpoints that are not necessarily correct, or that need to evolve with the times, let's say. Okay, so this is really important, and part of what I do with our museums is a form of cultural diplomacy. It's about how we can connect countries over our shared history, because the funny thing about history, which goes back to what I said at the beginning, I think, of our talk, which is how, we talked about countries thinking that some problems are only their own and that they're not part of a global conversation. Well, since the beginning of time, we have been in a global conversation, and people are not aware of that, right? Every country has in this world, before there were even borders, people were migrating and moving from place to place. Different types of people, mixed with one another for different reasons, whether trade or otherwise. And through that sort of conversation, we can put it, and communication with other people, different civilizations have had amazing impact and different impact on others, whether it's language or it's different types of technology and all kinds of things. And I think people forget that so much of what we are today is just, a complete amalgamation of all different kinds of things. And it's important to know that there's no pure, this or that. Everything is quite a beautiful mixture of a lot of things. And through cultural diplomacy, you're trying to highlight that with others. You're trying to ensure people understand that we have so many similarities in so many things that we do, cultural practices, cultural thinking, traditions, heritage, even in pop culture. And we need to find that common ground, because when you find common ground, you're more likely to talk to a person. You're more likely to listen, which is the most important thing.
Right.
And then you get somewhere. But if you're constantly focused on what's different, you will just feel the fear of, well, they're not familiar, they're different from me. And as people, we are programmed to avoid distress. We are programmed to avoid uncomfortable situations. So it's hard to reprogram your body and yourself to do that. So instead of reprogramming that, we try to focus on the part of your body and your brain that is ready to engage and to converse and to experience something that they're comfortable with. So that's going to be the angle of what are the similarities that we have? What are the common things that we have and common experiences, even if they're good or bad ones, that we've been through tough times together. And as you know, with the pandemic, I think that's brought many people together because we've all had to go through a very traumatizing time, and it's brought everyone in the globe together in ways that probably you wouldn't have had if you didn't have a pandemic and all that came with it to bring people together.
Right. Is this the sort of work you're talking about, and the work in museums? Was that born out of a plan and a desire at Hamilton?
Well, I definitely didn't think I'd be doing the job I am now. So, no, it wasn't necessarily the plan. It's part of the plan, which was, so when I was in Hamilton, I knew I wanted to study art. I was always a sort of artistic student in high school. I scored one of the highest grades in the British system for art, and it was something I was just very passionate about. But of course, at that time, which I think still happens today, but my father was the kind of person who would say, for whatever input you have to have an equivalent, a good output. Let's put it that way. So for him, he thought, well, if you're going to go study art, your output, I don't know what it would be. Would you really be, would you make use of that type of a degree? And for that reason, I said, well, I'll study communications, and that will put him off my back for a bit, because I'll kind of give him a different reality than what I was doing, and make him feel that, when I get out of college, I'll get into marketing and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, oh, that's great. So yeah, you can go ahead and do art as well. So I played that, and I did it. And I did it so that I could take all the art history classes I wanted, and I could do art practice itself. So, pottery, ceramics, painting, and everything else. But my view was that probably after I finished that I would ideally work in either a museum environment as a researcher, or someone who really actually physically took care of objects, like what a conservator would do. Because I'm a person who loves to work kind of solo. I'm a introverted person, which I'm sure most of my Hamilton friends who will listen to this podcast will be laughing hysterically, because they probably would say I'm the most extroverted person they've ever met, but I'm actually not. That has always been something I've had to work on to kind of be accepted in an extroverted world where people appreciate extroverts and don't appreciate introverts.
I've heard many introverts say that exact thing. I understand. Yeah,
it's totally true. And so I always thought of this lovely job of, quietly, writing papers about a particular collection and things. But what ended up happening was I graduated, and then I said, I have to do something in museums. It's something I want to do. And so I took my graduate course then later, which museums at that time, museum studies courses were very few. It was not popular. Now it is. But 20 years ago, I think there was only like 10 programs maybe in the US. So I took the Harvard program and I loved it. And I came back to the UAE and I was sort of like, well, I don't even know if I'll get a job in museums, but I don't even know if they have any here. And it's all serendipity in a way, but I eventually met someone who knew someone, and they were like, we're thinking of starting a sort of museums organization. We have a few museums, but they're kind of dispersed and they're not really being taken care of. Do you want to join this group and this team? And since I've always been a very curious person and someone who enjoys that, I was just like, oh yes, like I wasn't worried that I'm not maybe qualified because I haven't worked, a job yet, or that this was something bigger than I could probably handle. I just thought, this is so exciting. I can't wait to see what it could be. And so I joined it. And after 2 years as a deputy director, I was promoted, and I've been in the job now for 15 years in total. And I love it. But what's different about it, as I mentioned earlier, is not the job I thought. I'm not quietly sitting behind a desk, looking at archaeological artifacts. Instead, I'm managing a lot of staff, a lot of departments, communication, IT, finance, HR. I do a lot of administrative work to manage 16 museums. It's a lot of work. Capital projects I have to project manage. So it's a lot more than what I had liked to do, but I love what I do now. I know that it's something beyond my dreams to have been able to kind of be part of a founding organization, to be part of such critical time of creating new things and structures and really building new institutions, literally from the ground up. Very few museum directors in the world could say they've done that. And even to say they've done it like 5-6 times, which I have, to build new museums, that rarely happens in a lifetime career. So I feel like I've learned a lot on the job at a young age, and I was given a lot of trust and a lot of motivation by my boss. So I feel really proud of that. And I would have never thought I could have done that. Had you asked me that in Hamilton, I would have said impossible for me to do a job that difficult, that demanding, that public facing, but I did, and I've managed so far. So far, so good.
That's fantastic. It's that recognition at some point when you advance in your career and rise up the ranks, how far away from the actual job you were doing or that you enjoy you get, right? You do less and less of the actual job that you started to do when you grow in your career, because you start doing all the administrative work and managing people and so forth. I find it, a lot of times that the thing that I enjoyed most about the sort of line of work I was working on, I ended up not doing it because I'm doing all this other stuff.
That's true. But what's great about that is in a way, I thought I was kind of doomed to that forever. Uh-huh. But I took the leadership course by Aspen Institute. And one of the things I learned in that course was it doesn't matter if you're stuck in what you're just talking about, what you just described, a very heavily administrative or whatever, any job that has moved you further from, let's say, your core passion.
Yeah.
In this particular day that we spent talking about this, they said, you've got to look for those moments where you can take those little kinds of little nuggets in the day that you can make your own, that you can enjoy the part of your job that you like. Yeah. But you have to carve that out. You have to look for those opportunities. And after that course, which was over 2 years ago, I have been doing that. I've been looking at my job where I said, you know what, I don't need to really do this. I can delegate it. And now that I have this 1 hour or this, 1 day or this 1 week, I'm going to use it to get involved in the graphic design of a particular catalog because I love designing and I love colors and etc. Or I'm going to do it to be able to visit a particular workshop and really engage and see kids and spend time with them in an arts education workshop, that I love to see how kids react and respond to things when I normally don't get a chance to do that. I have a team that do that, so I started to really do more of that, and I feel like I'm getting that joy back. Writing about what I'm doing is helping me also. It's allowing me to express some of, what I'm thinking about, what's important to me. So it's all about finding, I think, and really cultivating those moments when you do get them. Because yes, it's so easy to get buried under like tons and tons of paperwork and feeling like you have no way out, but there's always a way out. That's what I've learned.
Well, you're inspiring me, Manal. I appreciate it. I should have this conversation with you a long time ago.
Oh, you know what? Okay, I should tell you this. I remember it now because I think this way it'll stay with you, and hopefully anyone who listens to this, which I hope will be more than one person, but it's a story. I think it's a Confucius story, but the story is that there is basically there's something being chased by a lion, and I can't think what it is, but let's say it's a deer. So no, it's not a deer. What is it? But anyway, something's being chased by a lion, and it gets to a point to the point where it's at a cliff, and the lion's about to attack it. So he sees like a kind of like almost like a vine or whatever. So jumps on that, grabs it. Actually, maybe it was a person. So there you go. The person then runs and jumps and is literally dangling off this branch. And he sees at that moment, a little mouse who's beginning to gnaw at the at the little vine. And it ends with him saying, "Oh, I see the mouse basically gnawing at the vine." So he knows at that moment that he's done for. Within a few minutes or whatever, that mouse is going to break that vine, and he's going to fall down to the depth below. But he sees suddenly a small strawberry growing on the side of that branch, and he picks it up and he eats it, and he says, "Oh, what a beautiful moment to enjoy that." And of course, I haven't said it as eloquently as Confucius, but the idea is that even in the worst circumstances, there's always that moment to see that strawberry and to enjoy it, and in a way, that's the visual of in the days where you feel like you are going to fall into an abyss of paperwork and administrative type of work, is to say, well, where is my little strawberry for the day? Where's that one moment I'm going to take it, even when everything else seems very chaotic, but I can enjoy the taste of it, even if it is just for a matter of seconds or minutes, metaphorically. And I think that's how I look at it, is that we're always going to be chasing. And the lion in this story can be anything, right? Yeah, the lion can be anything that gives you the anxiety that you have to be running, that there's a lot, that you have to do. And we live in a world like that. There's so much pressure to do so much and to be successful and to achieve so much. But we have to find that moment to have that taste of that strawberry that makes life enjoyable, makes life worth living. And that's really kind of the concept there. So I keep that in my head all the time.
That's a good one. I'm going to save that one. So in your career growth and taking on new roles as you've advanced, you recently added another role to what you do, and that is helping to run the school now as a trustee.
Isn't that crazy? I just, oh my God, when I remember talking to President Whitman, and I thought I was having a conversation with him about something totally different, which is more like, oh, we just like your advice on what you think about something. When really he was basically there to ask me, would you join and become a trustee? Like, it was not even on my radar that he would even think to consider me as a trustee. So I remember after, I thought, am I getting this right? Maybe I misheard you. Are you saying that you want me to become a charter trustee? Like, I was just still not processing that at all, because of course you can imagine in my mind, trustees have always been much, much older and tend to be, let's say people who are extremely in an economic bracket, let's say that, on one end, and they tend to be male. I know there are more females now, but that's still, so it was more the age and, the kind of, also the area in which the person works. I know most trustees tend to be, lawyers and very successful businessmen and stuff like that. So I just thought, here's me, and I can't possibly imagine that I'm someone they would consider. But, really a huge, it's not just I'm grateful, but it really shows a lot about how Hamilton is evolving and how much Hamilton is seriously looking at widening its understanding and representation across the board for a hopefully better, college experience for their students. Because I know that it is not at all a type of tokenism or anything like that. They are really, really invested in it. I imagine, as a student, maybe a lot of people would feel cynical about it, but they do such amazing work. And being part of the board now, I see the immense amount of work in terms of the considerations and, the priorities and how many priorities they are and how to be able to achieve all of that. And also, do it with enough of what funding they have. And it's incredible. I feel I've never really come across an institution that is just doing so much. And luckily, with the leadership of President Whitman and also with the trustees and everything else, I think it's in a really good space, in a good place, and it will continue to do very well if it continues down this line. And I know that I just felt really proud and very happy to be part of it, because I know that my experience was a wonderful experience, but I know that there were gaps. I know that they were, as we mentioned earlier, issues with diversity at that time. And I know they've done a lot since then, but I know that I'm in a position now where I'm maybe a bit more attuned to that. I can think of my own personal experience about a few things and think, we could probably make that better. We could improve that. And I'm hoping that, this is where I'll be utilized the most, as well as in other areas. But I think, having that opportunity to give back is so amazing to me, because I know people think, tuition for Hamilton, is on the higher end. And I know tuition is expensive across the board in most colleges, but what it gave me is way beyond what we paid for my tuition. It's invaluable. And I can't say that enough. And I always look back at it. I think this, you might find funny, Dave, but till today, I will have dreams about Hamilton. I wake up and I would have dreamt of being there, of waking up in my bedroom, which I remember for some reason very, very well, thinking emotions of walking at dawn, down the path, and the sound of the trees, and and just the feeling of home. It really feels like another home to me. It really did, and it became another home to me. So to kind of come back in this way is, I swear, it's almost like when they say if you kind of imagine something over and over again, it manifests itself. I almost feel like it did. I almost feel like this is the one time I believe that can happen if you really think about something long enough. And I never thought, I want to be a trustee, but I always thought, I want to go back home one day. I want to be there again. I want to retire there maybe. Something has to happen where I get back to the Hill. And I think this is the way it's happened this time. So I'm just, over the moon about it.
That's great. And well, look, hearing you talk, there's no question that having your insight, your perspective, and just your wisdom in that room and around that table, I think is immensely valuable for the school. So I'm glad you're there.
Thank you.
And I hear you talk about your vision of what a trustee is. I mean, I think back when I was a student, even long after, the trustees were this mythic sort of group. I envision, these old guys with robes on, sitting around, the council of elders sort of thing. So it's refreshing to see that it's not that. Although you probably can't tell me, but I think there probably is like a robe that you all get, right? There's like a trustee robe that you have to.
I'll tell you one thing: they're not black; they're pink now. So I'm so happy that we have so many women. I'm just like, yes, but really, it's like, when I'm amongst a lot of amazing people. I can tell you that, and I can tell you every single one of them is truly dedicated to doing something great. So when you have that, you just feel like, you know, you're in good hands and everything is going to be okay, and that you're going to give the best that you can. I know I'm giving 100%, and already prior to being on the board, you know, random students would email me, by the way, from looking me up on the directory and asking me, what should I do with my career? And I always responded.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I've always felt like if I can help certain students move into a certain direction to work in the arts field or anything else, I'm happy to do it, because I know how important it is to feel like you have someone who can understand you or maybe has your same life experience. I should say a lot of those students happen to be Arab students. There seem to be a lot more of them now. So they tend to look me up. So it's been good. And
good.
Hopefully we'll do more. But I'm so happy to be able to have had this conversation with you as well. It's such a great initiative to do this. I think more people who can hear the stories of you know, past students and the good and the bad is always important, because nothing is perfect. And I think I would say this, I think because of the reality of the perfection that is, you know, perpetuated in social media today, so many young people really believe that life somehow is perfect. And when things aren't perfect, when things go wrong, when a professor or another student says the wrong thing or there's such a backlash, you know, and people get so upset. I'm thinking, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, these things actually happen in real life, and you don't have to react the way that I see people do. It's called have that conversation. You know, start mediating, you know, mitigate issues before they become exasperated. And I think it's just everyone assumes that there's a perfect way that everyone should behave or everyone should act, plus how everyone thinks that they should perform. And I think students are under enormous pressure to be perfect and get the best grades and everything. And that's not that important. You know, at the end of the day, it's, you know, how are you, you know, enjoying this experience? What are you learning about yourself and about others? And, you know, at the end of the day, the greatest knowledge you can have is knowing, you know, your inherent or the level of your ignorance, right? It's that's the most important thing, is there's so much out there I don't know.
Right. And you know, it's come up on this show with other conversations of that school, but I think many schools and that time of your life, you go to a place like that because it is a safe place to try things and fail and learn how to fail.
Of course. I mean, I think the worst thing you can I guess teach young people today is that, you know, is to be afraid of failure, right? Yeah. Because basically being afraid of failure means you will never ever come against the possibility of you succeeding. Because if you're always afraid of failure, you'll never try something that you may or may not succeed at. And I remember in my mind, when I came to Hamilton, I was taught in my school to be afraid of failure, right? I was taught that, you know, be as in conservative type of conventional teaching I had was, don't get into a position where you might have to make a decision where you could make the wrong one. So just avoid all those situations altogether. That's how you avoid mistakes. That's how you stay perfect in a way, in terms of you don't fail. And when I went to Hamilton, exactly as you just said, I felt that what was encouraged was, it's okay to fail. You can be yourself. You can say things. You can ask questions in class, which may or may not be relevant, and no one's going to laugh at you or make you feel bad about it. And do you know how much I relished that? I remember thinking, first of all, like I was in a dream for the first 2 semesters that happened. I think it only hit me sophomore year that I actually could do this. And then I couldn't stop. I think then I became someone who's just like, oh my God, I can do or say whatever I want. And in every class, I was like, well, what about this? And maybe does that connect to that? And all my professors were so nice about it. They always said, well, maybe it does. If that's what you think, then it's valid. And I've never had that before. And I think people took that for granted, that you could do that you could just express ideas and thoughts and connections. And nobody was going to say, oh, no, that's not how it should be, or your thought or your idea doesn't have any merit. It was always like encouraged, and if not celebrated. And also it was encouraged to kind of learn in different ways. And in a way, Hamilton was, I think, it set a precedent for a lot of what happened later when it came to sort of education of people with different abilities. That when I was there, I'm sure there were a lot of people who had learning difficulties and other things, and maybe they couldn't write papers as well as others or whatever. But Hamilton always gave the option of, well, if you can't write a paper, maybe you can do this, or you can give an oral exam, or you can make a movie about it. That's amazing. I remember that there was options to do that, where if I had been at school here, that would have not been an option. You would have had to take a standard test and take a particular write a particular paper, and there would have been no buts about it. And for people who are slow learners or slow readers or who have dyslexia, well, too bad, And I felt Hamilton, without even knowing that necessarily, was just so much open to, well, do whatever you feel is right for you, that you feel you can express your idea as best that you can. And if it can't be done in writing, we can try something else. Although, writing was of course very important, but I think there was still that. And that's a wonderful thing to have those options. It's a privilege at the end of the day.
For sure. Looking back across your experience and your time at Hamilton, anything you wish you had known?
That's an interesting one, because I think if I answered that there are things I wish I had known, then I can name what some of those things are. However, I think it's better to not have known. In my opinion, I think if I had known certain things, I would have gone through the experiences I did. And those experiences, however painful some of them were, I think were extremely vital and important for me in my life to be where I am and today, and to be more empathetic or more understanding or whatever it might be about particular issues or situations. I think had I known certain things, I would have avoided them. As I mentioned earlier, I would have taken avoid the distress, and I would have fallen into that trap. And I would have done it, the way like the movies, would have said, do this, hang out with these people, you'll do well, you'll be popular, take these types of classes, you'll graduate well, and you'll be good for the marketplace. And I'm glad I didn't know any of that. I'm glad I went in there with completely sort of a clean slate in my mind. And I just took every day as it came. And I took every day as an exciting moment to learn and to be stimulated and to make connections. And I think, things will not be perfect. And there were some moments that weren't, but thank God for those. They really taught me a lot.
All right, that's Manal Ataya, class of 2001. Trustee. Our first one on the show. Hopefully not the last. I hope you listen to that conversation and realize, as I did, what just two people talking can do in terms of finding common ground and finding human connections. And it makes you just wish that there was more opportunities for people around the world to do that. Maybe we could find a way for more people to make human connections like that. We'd be in a better place globally and in this country. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. Had I Known.buzzsprout.com. Had I Known show on social media. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on this show. And once again, Doc is going to play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you next week.
Had I Known podcast show on your radio or take it to go.